The Little Black Book. The rain-slicked streets glistened under the dim glow of the street lamps, and Thomas Hale almost walked past it. At first, it looked like nothing, just another scrap of trash washed up against the curb. But as his eyes caught the faint shimmer of worn leather, he slowed. It was a book. Small, no larger than his palm, bound in cracked black leather that looked older than the buildings towering over him. No title. No markings. Just a dull brass clasp that had long since rusted, leaving the book slightly ajar, its yellowed pages whispering in the wind. Thomas hesitated only a second before stooping down. The weight of the book surprised him. It was heavy, unnaturally so, like it carried more than paper between its covers. He looked around, half expecting someone to call out, claim it, snatch it back. But the street was silent. Empty. He opened it. Inside, neat lines of handwriting filled the pages. Names. Just names. Each written in thick black ink, each followed by a date. Some dates were old, decades gone. Others were recent, shockingly recent. And at the very bottom of the page, still wet as if freshly written, was a name Thomas knew: Evelyn Price, October 12, 2023. Evelyn. His neighbor. A kind, middle-aged woman who always left a plate of cookies at his door during the holidays. The date beside her name wasn't months old, or even weeks. It was tomorrow. A chill crawled up his spine. This had to be some kind of sick joke, someone playing with names and random dates. He snapped the book shut, tucked it under his arm, and hurried back to his apartment, the storm outside matching the thunder in his chest. All night, he couldn't sleep. His mind replayed Evelyn's smiling face, the neat ink on the yellowed page. By morning, he convinced himself it was coincidence. Until the sirens wailed. From his window, Thomas saw the flashing red and blue lights crowding Evelyn's building. Neighbors gathered in their robes and slippers, whispering, pointing. When the stretcher rolled out, her body covered by a sheet, Thomas staggered back, clutching the little black book so tightly his knuckles turned white. The ink hadn't lied. By the next morning, Thomas hadn't slept a wink. His apartment felt smaller somehow, the shadows longer, heavier, as if they were watching him. The little black book lay on the kitchen table, innocently closed, yet impossible to ignore. He tried to convince himself it had all been coincidence. Maybe Evelyn had an accident. Maybe the sirens had been random. But deep in his chest, a gnawing fear refused to be silenced. That book wasn't ordinary. It had weight, not just physical, but something darker, something alive. Curiosity, a trait that had always saved him in his reporting career, now felt like a curse. Thomas opened the book again. The pages seemed to shift under his fingertips. Names he didn't recognize, dates that didn't make sense, and at the very top of the next page, in ink that almost pulsed with life, was another name. Samuel Greer, October 15, 2023. Samuel. His childhood friend, the one who had recently moved back to the city. Panic bubbled in Thomas's stomach. He had to warn him. He had to destroy the book. He had to do something, anything to stop this madness. By the time he reached Samuel's apartment, the air had grown colder, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Thomas knocked, but there was no answer. He tried the handle, unlocked. Hesitation gripped him, but the need to save his friend pushed him forward. Inside, everything was eerily silent. Samuel's apartment looked untouched, ordinary. And then Thomas saw it, on the kitchen counter, a coffee cup, still steaming. But no Samuel. A soft creak behind him. Thomas spun, heart pounding. Shadows danced across the walls, and from the corner of the room, he glimpsed a figure. A thin, wavering silhouette, barely visible. The temperature dropped so sharply that his breath fogged in the air. The little black book whispered in his mind. Not with words, not yet. Just a presence, a pull, an unseen hand guiding him. And then Samuel appeared. Or, at least, what used to be Samuel. His eyes hollow, his movements jerky, unnatural. His lips opened, but no sound came out. Instead, a dark smudge of ink seemed to seep from his chest, crawling across the floor like a living shadow. Thomas stumbled back, the book falling open at his feet. The pages flipped violently on their own, settling on the name of the next victim. His own heart screamed as he saw it. Thomas Hale. The ink on the page rippled, almost breathing. The book wasn't just recording death, it was choosing it. And now, Thomas realized with a cold, crushing certainty, he was next. The room spun. Shadows pressed in from all sides, whispering, giggling, calling his name. Samuel, or what remained of him, took a slow, deliberate step forward. Thomas grabbed the book, yanking it into his chest. The pages snapped shut with a deafening clang, but the shadows didn't retreat. They never would. Thomas stumbled backward, his heart hammering as if it wanted to burst from his chest. He clutched the book tightly, but its weight felt unnatural, as if something alive was pressing down from inside. Samuel's eyes were hollow and black, a mere shell of the man he once was, his soul seemingly trapped within the pages of the little black book. Thomas, Samuel's lips moved, but no sound came out. Instead, a whisper echoed inside Thomas's mind, "Open it, or join us." His hands trembled as he dropped the book to the floor. The pages began flipping on their own, swirling like caught in a storm. Every page revealed names Thomas recognized, friends, neighbors, ex-lovers, each accompanied by a date. Some were tomorrow, some tonight. Thomas recoiled. "This is impossible, it can't be real," he shouted to the empty room. But the whispers grew louder, joined by laughter that seemed to crawl along the walls. A darkness spread, slithering from the walls, ceiling, and floor, enveloping him. Thomas held his breath. He grabbed the book again. The pages flipped violently, settling on one name, his own. Next to it was a question mark. Thomas Hale. His heart sank. The book wasn't just recording death, it was summoning it. And now it was summoning him. A beam of black light pulsed from the book. Thomas tried to step back, but his feet wouldn't move. Shadows stretched toward him from all directions, creeping along the walls, dripping from the ceiling. The whispers became one voice. "We've been waiting for you." Thomas screamed, but no sound emerged. The world around him seemed to vanish, only the book remained, glowing with malevolent intent. Pages turned on their own, each displaying a familiar face before vanishing into darkness. Then Thomas realized something horrifying. The last page of the book was still blank. It was waiting for him. His heart raced, and he felt the pull of the book urging him forward, forcing his gaze onto the empty page. Thomas's hands shook as he stared at the blank page. The book's pulse was palpable, almost alive, vibrating against his chest. Names kept appearing above it, friends, neighbors, strangers he had never met, but the weight of their inevitability pressed on him like a stone. A sudden knock echoed from the apartment door. Thomas froze. No one should be here, not in the middle of a storm like this. Another knock, louder, sharper. Against his better judgment, he approached the door. When he opened it, no one was there. Only the hallway stretched empty, but the shadows, they weren't just shadows anymore. They moved independently, creeping closer, whispering his name in a chorus of soft, eerie voices. He glanced down at the book. The blank page was no longer blank. Words began to appear, almost as if the ink was breathing. Julia Marston, October 18, 2023. Thomas knew Julia. She worked in the cafe 2 blocks away, always smiling, always cheerful. A cold sweat ran down his back. He had to warn her, had to stop this, but the shadows surged closer, pressing against his legs, making it impossible to move. Then a sound, soft, deliberate, and slow, came from the corner of the room. Footsteps. Heavy. Not human. Thomas's heart raced. He tried to lift the book, to close it, but the pages resisted, flipping faster, names appearing and vanishing, as if the book itself was deciding the order of death. A shadow separated from the rest, taller than any human should be, faceless, black as night. It stretched across the floor, reaching for him. Thomas stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet. The room seemed to bend, the walls pulsing like the pages of the book, the air thick and heavy, as if it was alive. The whispers became a roar, "You cannot escape. It is your turn." Thomas's vision blurred. The shadows enveloped him, cold pressing against his skin, seeping into his bones. The book lifted itself into the air, hovering above him, glowing with an eerie black light. A single name remained on the page, his own. But no date appeared. Only a blinking question mark, mocking him, waiting. Thomas knew then that the book didn't just predict death, it chose it. And now, it had chosen him. Thomas stumbled backward, trying to break free from the shadows that pressed against him like icy hands. The little black book hovered midair, its pages flipping violently, as if alive. Names appeared and vanished in seconds, friends, strangers, co-workers, all consumed by the darkness. He scrambled toward the apartment door, praying for escape. But the hallway had changed. It twisted unnaturally, stretching into impossibility, the familiar layout replaced by an endless corridor lined with more shadows, more whispers. Every step forward brought a chilling certainty: there was no normal exit anymore. From the corner of his eye, Thomas saw figures moving, neighbors, colleagues, even strangers he'd passed on the street, all drawn by the pull of the book. Their eyes were empty, their movements stiff and unnatural. They didn't speak, they merely extended hands as if offering him to the book. Thomas screamed, finally lunging forward to grab the book, hoping to close it or destroy it. But as his fingers touched the leather cover, it pulsed violently, sending a shockwave of dark energy through him. His vision blurred, walls twisting, floor bending, the shadows now alive, crawling, reaching. Suddenly, the book flipped to a new page by itself. A name appeared. Marco Hayes, October 19, 2023. Marco, a friend from work, who had laughed with Thomas just days ago. The shadows surged toward the door, carrying Thomas toward the book. He kicked and struggled, but gravity seemed to have shifted. The darkness bending reality itself, pulling him down. His hand slid across the page, and more names appeared in rapid succession, almost impossibly fast. The room filled with whispered warnings, desperate cries, faint screams, those trapped before him reaching through the void. Thomas realized with horror, the book wasn't just summoning death, it was spreading it, infecting everyone nearby with its inevitable reach. Every name that appeared was a life it would claim next. The shadows were extensions of the book, and there was no barrier that could stop them. He thought of throwing the book into the street, into the storm, but before he could act, a force, unseen, unstoppable, slammed him into the wall. The little black book hovered above, glowing with a dark pulse, the question mark beside his own name flickering like a heartbeat, as if daring him to fight. Thomas's chest heaved as he pressed himself against the warped wall of the corridor. The shadows pressed in, whispering his name over and over, like a sinister lullaby. The little black book floated before him, its pages flipping wildly, each turn echoing like a heartbeat in the silence of the distorted hallway. Every page revealed more names, more dates, each one disappearing from the page as its victim fell under the book's invisible grip. Thomas watched in horror as a face he recognized from across the street, a man he had waved to just days ago, flickered in the shadows before vanishing into nothingness. He ran, desperate, but the hallway twisted further, doors appearing where none should be, stairs leading nowhere, windows that opened into empty voids. The city outside no longer existed, only this endless, shifting asylum that the book had created around him. A faint scratching sound came from the floorboards. Thomas looked down. The pages of the book had opened themselves to a new section, a list of people he knew intimately. Neighbors, co-workers, friends, each name glowing faintly as if alive. And then, his own name again. The question mark pulsed, a heartbeat that echoed through his skull. The shadows thickened, solidifying into grotesque forms, merging with the images of those whose names had already appeared. Their mouths moved, screaming silently, clawing at him, dragging him toward the hovering book. The air itself felt alive, wrapping around him, constricting, suffocating. Thomas realized the truth: the book didn't just predict death. It corrupted life, bending reality, spreading its dark influence to anyone who even knew of its existence. Every glance at it was a summons, every whisper a promise. He had become a focal point for its power, and soon, everyone he knew would be consumed. He tried to throw the book away, hurl it into the void of the corridor, but a force slammed it back into his hands. The shadows twisted and coiled around him, laughter rising like black smoke from the book itself. He could feel the inevitability pressing down, the book's will overriding his own. And as Thomas stared at the flickering question mark beside his name, he understood the terrifying certainty: escape was impossible. Thomas's hands shook as he stared at the hovering book. The shadows closed in, whispering his name, pressing, suffocating. He opened the last page. Blank. A question mark pulsed like a heartbeat. Then, in an instant, the shadows swallowed him whole. The book fell to the floor, closing with a final, echoing snap. The page was no longer blank. Thomas Hale, October 20th, 2023. And somewhere, in the dark corners of the city, the little black book waited for its next reader.